For a moment, I'd like to address some chatter that has been going on social media since we've begun this discussion publicly, primarily surrounding the causes and the timing of the structural deficit. I feel the need to correct the record by emphasizing that the deficit situation we are now facing was inherited by the majority of this city council and by this city manager. The numbers we're looking at, which clearly show the spending down of tens of millions of dollars of city reserves on the building of infrastructure projects over the past 15 years, and the drastic cost increases related to our contracts for police and fire services and across the board due to inflation, are not my numbers, or even the numbers of our current finance director, but are taken directly from the official audited financial reports from each year. These reports were prepared by previous administrations and independent auditors and are available on the transparency portal of the city's website. To drive home the point, let's listen to the words of a former city manager from 4 years ago.
Hi, my name is Ray Casey. I'm the city manager of the city of Yucaipa. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you who have attended the city's community outreach efforts regarding Measure E, which, as you undoubtedly know, appears on the March 3rd ballot, and to encourage everyone in Yucaipa to cast your vote. By now, most of you are aware of the fact that the city's paramedic program, which provides 911 emergency services to Yucaipa residents, has been operating in the red for the past 4 years. In addition, based on recent contract changes with represented employees, the Sheriff's Department costs are rising at a faster rate than the city's revenues. During these last 4 years, the city has done everything in its power to avoid having to make cutbacks in these critical emergency services, thus keeping the present level of 911 services in place. During these 4 years, the city has been able to maintain the same levels of service in our paramedic program by using the savings from previous years when the paramedic assessment revenues did exceed expenses, and by drawing down the city's structural fund balance, as well as making some other cuts. Unfortunately, the time has come when this is no longer possible to keep these same levels of service into the future without additional funding. This is the reality that city officials are presently facing, and the reason Measure E has been placed on the local ballot. I want to thank those of you who have shared your thoughts, opinions, and concerns with city officials by providing feedback through social media platforms such as Facebook, Nextdoor, Twitter, Instagram, and through emails. This feedback is truly appreciated. Based upon this feedback, it appears there are few, if any, residents who disagree with the need to maintain these high levels of 911 emergency services that are presently being provided through both the city's paramedic program and the Sheriff's Department. However, it seems the biggest concern that did surface has to do with the funding mechanism that city officials ultimately chose for making the city's public safety budget imbalance whole. We've made a concerted effort to respond to the concern and to explain the rationale that underlies the decision to address this critical situation through a modest increase in the city's sales tax. I assure you, this decision did not come easy. It came only after city officials invested a great deal of study, thought, and effort, including reaching out to members of the community to get citizen input. Most of you undoubtedly now have a clear understanding of the issues surrounding Measure E, so I would just like to take this time to once again thank you for taking an interest in keeping Yucaipa a wonderful place to reside, and to say if you haven't done so yet, please vote on March 3rd. Your vote certainly does matter.
So yeah, Mr. Casey was right. 4 years ago, this problem was 4 years in the making, right? So let me repeat, this deficit was many years in the making. It is a result of significant investments in infrastructure beginning in about 2008, for example, drainage basins, the YPAC, parks, the police station, fire station 3, et cetera. Unrealized revenue expectations, that is commercial development that has not materialized at the levels predicted, and rising costs that have accumulated over time for everything from materials and labor to our contracts for police, fire, and paramedic services, all amid increased demand for services citywide as our population has grown. Now, some have been critical of staff salaries and raises, so let's review the timeline of the past year and a half or so since I started as city manager. I began in March of last year. At that time, MOU negotiations between the city and the Employees Association were well underway. On May 23rd, just 2 months after starting on the job, I called for a special city council meeting that we held at the YPAC to raise the red flag on our budget looming crisis, right? That crisis was news to a lot of people. We have gone out of our way to be transparent about the numbers. I'd say more transparent than the city had been in the past. In June, this council approved the current MOU with the Employees Association and the budget. As part of that discussion and part of the discussion at the special meeting in May, staff presented to the city council and the community the fact that we were running a deficit, had been for years, and the problem was getting worse. We expressed that we were not in crisis to the extent that we were out of money, but that we were deficit spending and that we would have to solve the problem, or long-term, we would be in crisis and run out of money. The question posed to the council at that time was, what course of action do you want to take at this point? Do you want to slam on the brakes, start cutting now, or do you want to maintain service levels for the next couple of fiscal years, for the next couple of budget cycles, while we focus on the long-term solution to the problem? The direction of the council was very clear: maintain service levels and let's start talking about the long-term fix. And that's what we've done. Some in the community have said that salaries here at the city are exorbitant. And I suppose that we could have a philosophical discussion about the value of public employees, how much public employees should be paid. But the reality is, if we want qualified people serving this community, then we have to set pay and benefits that are in line with industry standards. We have to be willing to compete. At council direction, we're currently under the process of doing a class and comp study. The results should be with us soon, the next couple of months. And those results will inform our next negotiations with the Employees Association. But we've had some conversations with the firm, and initial indications are that while there are some positions that are currently higher than industry average, and there are some positions that are currently lower than industry average, by and large, we seem to be right there in the average range in the industry. But let's be clear. City staff did not cause this problem, and staffing costs are not the problem. The net cost of all city staffing is only 9% of our budget. Let me repeat that. The net cost of all city staffing is only 9% of our budget. In most cities, if you get it down to 20%, you're doing great. This city runs incredibly lean. Most staff members wear multiple hats. This staff works hard serving this community. Our directors and managers don't just oversee people, they are working directors and working managers. Frankly, I think it is shameful that, for political purposes, some in the community have targeted staff. It's okay to question, and healthy to question, and even criticize elected leaders for policy decisions made. But to viciously attack staff is not okay. You're talking about people's livelihoods here, how they take care of their families. Staff works to execute the policy direction of the city council. Whatever financial issues the city is facing, the staff are not to blame. Yucaipa is blessed with talented, dedicated staff, an unusually high percentage of which also live here in Yucaipa and are invested in the betterment of our community. That is not the case in many government organizations, and it is something we should not take for granted. It is something we could easily lose if staff are mistreated. We're going to need to rely heavily on this staff as we lead the city to financial recovery. Now, while you can criticize any one staffing change or salary, in reality, staffing levels and salaries are not the problem. And I would hate to see the talented, hardworking staff of this city take the fall for the decisions that were made over the past 15 years and the market forces, such as inflation, that led us to this place. The bottom line is the budget cannot be balanced through cuts to staffing and/or salaries. There is simply not enough meat on the bone there. If we are to balance the budget through cuts alone without significant additional revenue streams, there is simply no way to get there without deep cuts to public safety. After all, public safety is the majority of what the city spends its money on. That being said, Yucaipa has a revenue problem. Should the residents of Yucaipa choose not to provide additional revenue, then service levels will have to be cut. This will necessarily include reductions in the number of deputies patrolling our streets, the closure of one of our 3 fire stations, and the shuttering of many of the facilities and programs that do not achieve sufficient cost recovery, such as the swimming pool and the senior center. I want to be clear, these are not intended as threats, but the numbers are what they are. We either have the revenue to continue services at current levels or we do not. The time for difficult decisions is now. I'd also like to comment on statements I've seen by some that criticize the city for not including staffing cuts in the options that are being considered. That is simply not the case. When you close a facility and/or eliminate a program, the cost savings primarily come from elimination of the staffing associated with that facility or program. If the senior center is closed, the savings will come mainly from reduction of staff that operate that facility. If a fire station is closed, the savings come mainly from the firefighter positions that are eliminated. So staffing cuts were absolutely included in the options presented. Further, should the community decide not to provide additional revenue, then in addition to service level, and thus staffing cuts, salary reductions, perhaps in the way of the furloughs, will have to be negotiated. I just want people to understand that we cannot make cuts to staffing without impacting service levels. And I think it's human nature to be skeptical of government, especially when we see so many examples of waste at the state and federal levels. The knee-jerk reaction is to say that government needs to tighten its belt and cut back on spending. But here in Yucaipa, the problem is much more one of insufficient revenue. Yes, we can absolutely cut spending, but not without also cutting services to the community. So the question before the community is really quite simple, although not easy. Are we willing to pay a little more to keep the services we have now? If not, then okay. But I don't want anyone to be surprised when drastic cuts to services across the board have to be made. Yucaipa is a wonderful town. Our strong commitment to police and fire services makes us one of the safest cities in the region. Our investments in community services such as parks, festivals, and youth and senior programs help to build and maintain a strong sense of community. So the question really is, what kind of community do we want? What do we truly value? Are we willing to dig just a little bit deeper to maintain and protect the quality of life that we've all come to love? Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, that concludes my presentation. I believe the city attorney has some housekeeping items related to last-minute wording changes in the resolution.